welcome to Unsilenced. I'm here with Abby today, who has agreed to sit down and tell us a bit about her experience as a VCUG survivor and share those insights and wisdom with other survivors. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, where you're from.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm 22. I'm from New Mexico. I had VCUGs for like 10 years and it really affected my life.
I think that's definitely the common thread we've been noticing recently in terms of other survivors. Would you say that having the VCUG affected your childhood for better, for worse? Did it affect like your beliefs about yourself?
I think it did. It made me feel like helpless. It made me feel like I didn't really have a say in anything that happened to me. It really sucked and it made it hard to make friends because I think my ability to speak got impacted. It was hard to speak to others. It was hard to value my own opinions. I wasn't speaking a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. How would you say that this test affected your relationship with your family? Do you think that would have looked differently had the VCUG not happened?
I'm still very close with both of my parents, but I do feel on some level that I don't really trust them anymore.
Right.
I don't really like when people touch me, whether they're like strangers or whether they're like people I know. It just feels weird.
Yeah, it's almost like we want this bubble of space around us. According to a lot of other survivors, we just really want that respect for a personal space, and that goes a long way. And then in terms of maybe like school academics, so it's like so exciting that you're a grad student. Would you say that the VCUG like altered your academic performance or like your social presence and stuff like that?
It definitely did like impact my academic progress as a kid. It, like I said, it made it hard to express myself. I always had this feeling whenever I would talk, this like tightness in my throat, this just worry that something bad was going to happen. And I didn't know until like now that it was trauma that I was feeling.
Yeah, that's actually a great transition point. I would love to hear, if you're comfortable, more about the moment when you just really knew, like when you found out about the trauma and started to see all the dots being connected in your life.
Well, I've always suspected on some level that I have trauma for all of my life. I did a lot of I thought a lot of things that I thought were concerning to myself. I won't go into them, but they concerned me. And I really thought like I had been traumatized by a family member when I was younger, too young to remember and forgot. But then I saw that article on how it could cause trauma similar to that of assault, and it just clicked for me.
Yeah, I would argue that's one of the biggest common threads among this organization is just the prevalence of child sexual abuse symptoms. I think that has led a lot of us to identify as, sexual abuse survivors or at least relate to the hardships around it. What has your attitude been these days toward, the healthcare community, the medical community, since finding out about these studies that compare the similarities between the two?
I do kind of mistrust them on some level, more and more ever since joining this group and hearing about other people's experiences. The most trouble I have is with doctors that deal with that area of anatomy.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. So you mentioned since having the procedure, you've been hospitalized for like a myriad of other conditions, other problems. Can you identify any of those, any diagnoses you've received?
Well, one is hearing loss, one is seizures. I stopped having seizures in 2011, and one is anaphylactic shock from allergies. Those are the main three things I would go to the hospital for, besides VCUGs. I also at some point was in the hospital for like a week after they found I had a brain bleed.
Wow, that's terrifying. That must have been really scary, like going in with your trauma that way.
Yeah, but I honestly don't remember anything, and that's another thing this procedure has done for me is like it makes my memories all blurry. It makes everything really hard to remember. I don't remember a lot of my childhood, which makes me sad sometimes.
Yeah, that's a point I greatly relate to, Abby. I don't think I realized how much I dissociated during childhood until last year when I found out about this, and suddenly all those memories I thought I had just weren't there. And it's like fishing for invisible things. Would you say that dissociation was like a common occurrence for you in childhood as well?
Yes, I remember at one point during the VCUG, like somehow learning, tried to make myself learn dissociation. I can remember telling myself, like, okay, I'm not here, I'm somewhere else, just pretend you're somewhere else.
Yeah, no, that is a reasonable response from a child in that situation. And I would also even say that that's a similarity to the child sexual abuse as well, in terms of those characteristics. So, absolutely. Well, moving on to more of like your adult life and your young adult life, because you're definitely not old yet. uh, I'll pretend I'm not too. Let's talk about, I guess, like romantic relationships. What does intimacy look like to you?
To be honest, I don't know. I can't even get close to being in a romantic relationship with anyone because it just scares me. It feels weird to me. People seeing me in that way feels weird to me. I had a few relationships, I guess, if you could call them relationships in high school that, well, I'm not going to say like they put me off from dating at all, but they definitely did have an effect on my psychology as I was developing.
Absolutely. I think all the research on trauma in general is just a testament to like the very real effects of this even later. A term I hear repeated a lot among the girls is just the fact that a lot of us believe this procedure set us up for continued abuse later in life and into adulthood. Is that something that you would agree with? And if so, have you seen that manifest in your life at all?
I do agree. Like, I always want to say that I'm the kind of girl who would beat the living crap out of a person who was trying to hurt me, but I'm not that girl. My natural response is to freeze and dissociate and just wait because that's what I was taught.
In terms of like relationship to self and relationship to your body, I don't think I ever was connected to my body at all until last year. It was the first time I could take like a deep breath. I'm just curious how your body has felt. What has it been like to live in your body since this?
Yeah, that's probably like the worst way this procedure has affected me. I've never felt like I'm connected to my body. I've always felt like always kind of partially dissociated. And sometimes I wish like that part of my body, especially, sometimes I wish it didn't exist because I don't want to remember it exists. I know that makes me sound kind of crazy, but like it's kind of like it's too traumatic and too hard to like remember everything.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And, a lot of us come out of this with PTSD. And so a lot of girls are like reliving the bodily sensations. And I mean, I can't imagine how hard is that, to like really connect with a body that is kind of like been derailed, and is doing its own thing.
Yeah, last night I even had a nightmare about something similar. I have a surgery coming up for something unrelated. And in the dream, I went in to get an IV and they said I needed to get a catheter instead, and it was terrifying. So I definitely have some degree of PTSD from this. It keeps popping up. It's a recurring theme in my life, fear of this.
Yeah, I so relate to the nightmare thing. Like it comes up, it like crops up in all these random ways, but like the feeling is the same. if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Abby, how would you say that this experience has strengthened you?
Well, it makes me a person who is very aware of my boundaries. I just really need to be able to enforce them, have the strength to enforce them. Like, that's been a running theme, is like learning what I want, how I want people to touch me, when I want people to touch me. I just have to get better at actually saying what I want.
Yeah, and who knew that part could be like the hardest part? I really relate to that as a people pleaser, especially. It's having the words in your brain. And Abby, you wrote an amazing, amazing poem about that exact thing. Words come out. I know that resonated with so many of us. What inspired you in the moment to write that?
Well, you inspired me when you said that trauma has like an effect on expressive language. That's what stuck with me. It stuck with me because like not only am I like learning about expressive language as a communication disorders student, but it's just something that has always been true to me that I didn't think about it that way before. Whenever I feel like I can't get the words out, I remember like it's probably trauma that's causing that feeling.
Have you ever shared your traumatic experience with any healthcare professional? And if so, how were you received?
I shared it with a couple therapists. They understood why it could be traumatic, but I don't think they understand like truly how to help.
Yeah.
It's been a hard thing to bring up to people, and really the only people I've ever brought it up to are my parents and this group. Yeah, whenever I say it, I always feel like I'm overreacting because that's what I was told back then when I had my own concerns about what was happening to me. I was told like that those feelings couldn't possibly be valid, and that's something I still carry with me. That's a burden I still carry with me. Is like, I think the hardest thing is to like believe myself.
Yeah, self-doubt after this procedure it was for me like the biggest hurdle, I think, and just learning how to stop screaming at that terrified little toddler and say, it's okay. Like that was a normal response, and you don't have to hate yourself for having that response. In terms of like, the emotion you're feeling today, I guess if you could share one point with all of the healthcare community with guaranteed like immunity in a way, what point would you really want to talk about, or what would you want to tell them?
I want to tell them that, well, they need to be honest about everything. They need to be honest about like all the risks of this procedure and what could happen from it. Because if a patient is going into this and they don't know these things, then their consent isn't really consent. They're consenting to a version that's not real. They're they're consenting to a version that you've made up. Like that's what I did. When I was a kid, both I and my parents consented to a version of this procedure that was just uncomfortable, that wouldn't leave me with any trauma, and that I wouldn't remember.
Do you feel like your parents were similarly like victimized by this?
Absolutely. I don't think they were made aware of this. And it was hard for them to grapple with like my trauma when I told them.
Yeah, I can imagine how confusing that would be for a caretaker who didn't go through it and they believe what the doctors say because the doctors are respected and experts in their field. And it's like, why is my child acting out, being sensitive, being clingy, being paranoid, like whatever the case was? That abnormal behavior is suddenly like almost disciplinary issues or academic issues or social issues, just things that are not related to this procedure. And it's been really encouraging to meet girls like you who had similar problems as a kid and be able to point at that and say like, I get why that happened now. I feel like a lot of us did. demonstrate the same symptoms. How do you feel that the VCUG is still promoted as the gold standard for VUR diagnosis today?
Well, I'm confused and angry because, like, they know by now about the effects. Like, there's a whole group of women who have all experienced the same effects. And it's like how my mother says, if there's smoke, then there is fire. So why don't they believe us?
That's the question I have too. Yeah, I could not agree more with that. In terms of your experience, so you had VUR, and I believe you had a severe case, is that correct?
I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure, like, I had it
How many VCUGs did you have?
around 10, maybe 12.
Around 10. And did those happen on an annual basis or like more than once a year?
Annual basis, usually early March.
Okay.
I remember very distinctly the feeling of dread whenever my parents would say to me, "You're getting that procedure again." And I never understood, like, why I felt that way, because every time I waited to get one, it felt like the first time all over again. But it wasn't the first time. So, in a way, they were right that I wouldn't remember, but I do remember the feeling of everything.
Yeah, those are the parts that stick with me as well. And I was 2. So, like, theoretically, we didn't even think kids could remember that far back. But girls like me and you are showing that it's possible. You're not even 100% sure if you even had VUR. I guess my other question is, did they ever schedule you for a VUR surgery?
Um, when I talked to my mother, she said, like, they may have brought that up as an option to her, but she ultimately decided that these repeated procedures would be less risky.
Oh, okay. Well, that packs a brand new punch to the whole like informed consent thing. If your mother was choosing what she thought was the lesser of two evils like 10 times in a row, that's from a personal standpoint, that's unforgivable, to not equip a parent with the truth and the resources to care for her child.
It's the truth they have known since the 1990s. And I know, like, they could have known because, like, my mom says that she took me for a UTI, and the nurse said it was a UTI. It was a different type of infection caused by trauma. And if that nurse, who wasn't even specialized in urology, knew, then how could they not know?
When I was interviewing Emily, she brought up the point that there are like so many touches, like points of contact, right, for this procedure. You have the parent who could stop it, you have the doctor who could stop it, meaning the referring physician who could stop it, the nurse who could stop it, the radiologist who could stop it. Basically, a pretty sizable group of adults who could theoretically speak up at any point. And given that they've known this since the 90s, it does make you question why no one is speaking out. Do you feel failed in any way by a specific party, or like, do you feel failed by the medical community as a whole, by the hospital, by the staff?
I think I was failed in terms of mental health care. Like, a lot of the trauma, I just had to deal with myself, had to make sense of it in whatever way my still growing brain could. Why I ended up processing it like this, because no one gave me any pointers on how to process this, like, correctly. I just had to figure that out by myself, and I didn't know how to process trauma the right way.
Yeah, especially sexual trauma is particularly extreme for kids to undergo. And I believe it might even be like the most harmful as well. And just the fact that the sexual nature of the procedure is not considered, even in 2023, is beyond me.
Especially since, like, yeah, an adult could tell the difference between the two areas, but, like, A child cannot.
Do you feel a sense that as a kid, you were disadvantaged by being socially conditioned to view genitalia in one way, but then you were annually deprived of that agency, of that control? Did that feel confusing to you as a child?
Did, especially with like the influence of purity culture, because then I had like two separate influences telling me what to do with my body. Like one influence was telling me to like keep it away, as far away from other people as possible, and the other is saying like it doesn't matter because it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the doctors at this hospital.
Yeah, in a way, it's like your body never felt like yours.
No, it didn't.
Were you, forgive me if I'm wrong, but were you the one who has done some yoga? Did you find that helpful?
Oh yeah, I do yoga and it does help. It still gets like, it can be triggering though, like just certain parts of yoga. And I feel like another effect is like I have to know what happens next, like what a person is gonna do next. I need the world around me to be predictable, or there's like a total breakdown in my brain.
I think you're so brave to try yoga. That's a thing on my bucket list, my trauma bucket list, if that's a thing. So I'm really encouraged by just like your spirit and acceptance and willingness to try. But aside from the yoga, is there anything that comes to mind in terms of what has helped you most during your healing journey?
Well, another thing that's helped is just like getting the word out, letting more and more people know about it, getting a million people to see that trauma was
Yeah,
important in that journey. Because now a million people, more than a million people, know about the effects. And that's much more that knew previously.
and you were a big part of that, if not the reason we have reached so many people in such a short amount of time. Is there anything about your TikTok experience that you'd like to share after going viral?
Like some of the comments were honestly like rude, but I also saw like just so many people say like I didn't know this happened. And it all makes sense now. And it warms my heart to see other people like getting to get closure like I did. And that's what I really want, is for people to get closure on their trauma, because I didn't have that closure for years.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. That is exactly what I want as well. And I think part of the reason it was so angering for me, that might be different from your story, is just the fact that I did have dissociative amnesia for so long. I obviously did not have as many tests as you did. And so coming to terms with that in my late 20s was very much like a, why on earth did no one tell me I could have fixed so many things? I could have avoided so many bad things from happening to me. In terms of closure, what does a good future look like for you after you get that closure? Like, what does that closure look like?
It's a well-known fact that this procedure that can cause trauma. I want that to be shown in the risks. I want websites to show that that's one of the risks. I want it to show that it can be traumatic, not just that it could just be a little uncomfortable. None of that. I want it to be honest.
I love that. That is what we want. It's not asking for much, in my opinion. How did you find out about Unsilenced? How did it feel meeting the other women?
Well, there was just one day where I was feeling anxious, and just randomly I thought about the VCUGs and the trauma it might have caused. And I wanted to check out like the Reddit that there used to be. And then I looked it up on Reddit and I found like there was a whole other community that had been formed that I didn't even know about. And that had a website. and that has support group, and I was like, why not join?
I love that story. I love hearing that people found us. You know, there was definitely a time when it was like, how do we reach these people when half of them don't even know they have this test?
Like, I always knew like there were people talking about it because there used to be like a subreddit like called VCUG trauma.
Mhm.
It got shut down or something, but a lot of people would post there. They would post to like medical PTSD, they would post to medical abuse survivors and to CPTSD. And I would post there too. So I knew like people would talk about it there, and it's one of the places where I felt like I could be heard.
I love the way you put that. That's exactly how it was for me. There was nowhere else on the internet when I was looking, and I was like dissociating, just reading the same words over and over, like not even the triggering ones, but just like painless, like slightly uncomfortable, harmless, low risk, minimally invasive. Those were triggering to me because I was so confused in that moment, thinking, am I the only girl? Did you ever feel like a similar isolation?
I did. I feel like I tried to share this experience with myself. Like, I remember trying to share it with people at a church camp, but I just couldn't find the words. I just started breaking it down in front of them. I couldn't say it.
It's very hard to speak about this trauma. Like, I will try to form a cohesive point, and next thing I know, like my time blindness will kick in, and it's like hours later, and I have no cohesive point to make because the trauma makes my brain just like come apart at the seams, it feels like. I think you'd be a great person to ask. What advice would you share with the girls who are just now finding out about this procedure or just now coming to terms with the trauma?
Just don't blame yourself. Work on believing yourself, because that's the important part. Not everyone will believe you. It's a harsh reality of this, but just learn to believe yourself because you need that internal validation. It's that self doubt that is the most harmful. Like, I know that last part. Well, I didn't mean to like say like don't even talk about you won't be believed, but I was trying to say is like some people will just find any excuse not to believe you. Believe yourself.